What's up, family? What's up? What's up? What's up? Greetings, 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 greetings. This is Chief Kalinago with another video. I know you guys saying, man, listen, Chief Kalinago is in a row, but you know what? It's all good. I told y'all I took a break from this, but I got to get back to it. I got to get back to it. You feel me? So let me just come down here real quick, make sure that we are good. All right, so we are good. Now, the information, a lot of the information that I'm putting out there, okay, I put the links in the description. So do me a favor, please. Go ahead and share that information as much as you can. Get that out there, family. Get it out there. Like, I just cannot stress again how important it is to get that information there as soon as possible because all this is imperative. Okay. All this is very, 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 very important. All right. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the great spirit, universal source. I want to give thanks to my ancestors for just endowing me with the knowledge, you know what I'm saying, of self, put me in a position to be able to bring that information. I've been doing that for a very long time. But like I said, I'm back, okay, doing some things. So now what I'm going to do is for a lot of you that, because I've seen a lot of people are posting like they heard that they have Indian or whatever the case may be, they're not sure, they cannot trace anything. It's fine. Okay, we're going to talk about a few things and I'm going to break down, terms of Negro, Black, Indian, natives to a certain extent. I'm going to break down to you not Indian, indigenous just by itself. When we use the term indigenous, it's imperative that we add original indigenous to it, add original to the word. Okay. Now you may say, well, Chief, isn't that contradictory? Well, you say it doesn't matter. I never said who we are didn't matter. All I said is when you're vibrating on a higher frequency, then the first thing that you have to acknowledge yourself first is as a man or not correction. First thing is to acknowledge yourself as a God. Okay, that's number one. Second, as a man or a woman, meaning that a God that's manifest in the flesh of a man and or a woman. Then we could deal with the identity aspect of things when it comes to geographical, locations and what we may call nationality. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. If you guys are ready for this, do me a favor, please go ahead and type some ones in the chat. Go ahead and share that information because we're about to break that down. So if you are confused or you are not sure, all right, or you still believe that we all came from Africa, I'm going to continue to debunk that, all right, like I have done in many, many videos, but I'm just going to give you some more information and all that stuff is in. Okay, I put a lot of that stuff is not a lot of it. Most of the reference that I'm going to be going through is actually in the description. Okay, so with that being said, that is just again to put things in perspective because when we step up, we want to have enough information to debunk, okay, the lies that are being told or that were perpetuated by so-called Native Americans in the new definition of what Native means. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to let me see which one I should go through first. All right. Let me see. I'm going to go. I think this is the first one I'm going to do. Okay. Let me share this and we're going to get into this. All right. Good. And like I said, guys, go ahead and share this, share this, share this. Okay. And that stuff is in the description. I think this is where we are at. Give me a second. Let me see if that's it. Yes. Okay. So we are going to do some reading. Reading is fun for the mental. This the author of this document is Jack D. Forbes. All right. So we are going to go through this to show you like how everything got intermingled. As a matter of fact, you know what? That's not the first thing I'm actually going to show you. No, that's not the first thing I'm going to show you. I'm going to go here, okay, to break down the difference between, Negro de Terra and Negro de Guinea. That I think is the first thing I should do. So let me go ahead and do that first. And then I'll go into Jack Forbes, okay? Because I kind of want it to make sense for you guys. Come on, give me a second here, guys. All right, take that, copy that, and then close this. And then I'm going to put that here. All right, paste that in here. Okay, beautiful. And let me just go back to Walter Plecker. Let me see. Okay, 1800s, 1924. Okay, here we go. So that's the first thing I'm going to go through. Let me share my screen. Okay. Chronological, historical. Here we go. Okay, so Blacks and Indians, common cause and confrontation in colonial Brazil. So we're going to talk about Brazil right here because when the Europeans came to the Americas, they first came to what's now called the Caribbean, or what we now call the West Indies. But what a lot of people don't know, or what they're aware of, the entire Americas were called the West Indies. Even the United States, everything was just called the West Indies. Okay, so but we're going to talk about that here for a second. It's about 40 pages. All right, so bear with me here. And like I said, reading is fun for the mental. So we are going to go through this. Okay, so now Blacks and Indians, common cause and confrontation in the colonial Brazil. All right, the author of this is Stuart B. Schwartz, Yale University. Okay, now whether you think Yale is, a reputable university, that's on you. But all I know is it costs a pretty penny, thousands of dollars to go to Yale to get any type of education. Okay, considered to be one of the top universities in the United States. Okay, so now in 1814, the midst of a series of Bahamian slave insurrections, a group of Xhosa slaves initiated yet another scheme to gain their freedom. Earlier in that year at Itapua, on the outskirts of Salvador, a group of 250 or so had risen under the direction of the Muslim religious leader, or Malam, burning the installations at a whaling station and devastating a number of plantations before a force of government cavalry could check their movement. A second revolt among the Xhosas sprang up in March 1814 in the sugar growing areas of the nearby agricultural zone of the Reconcavo, before it too was suppressed. But the Xhosa continued to conspire on how to win their freedom. A new plot was hatched among urban slaves, dock workers, and freed artisans in July. But they realized that to have any chance of success, they needed to gain the support of plantation slaves and of other groups who might potentially be their allies. Local Maroon communities were brought into the planned revolt. To this end, they also contacted Indians in the region who they supposed would join them in revolt, because as slaves believed these Indians wanted their land that the Portuguese had taken from them. Now, pause. What we have to put in perspective here, okay, is that first things first. Of course, they're talking about 1814 here, all right? So, but when we go back to 1492, please keep in mind, the people who came to our shores, okay, they were not Caucasian or pale people, okay? They were people who looked just like us and could have been considered a whole lot darker than us, a heavier hue of a brown color in complexion. Keep that in mind, all right? Let us put this story in perspective, okay? Now that's established. Let me see where we are at, all right? Representatives of Indian groups even arrived in Salvador to speak with the plotters, but they were quickly sent away. Their presence would have raised suspicion among the authorities since Indians by the beginning of the 19th century were an uncommon sight in the city. Nevertheless, the realization by the slave conspirators of shared grievances with the Indian peoples of the region and the willingness of the latter to consider the possibility of collaboration with African slaves against the colonial regime underlined the political awareness of both and the ironies of their historical relationship. Interaction and contacts between indigenous peoples and diaspora Africans is one of the least studied and understood aspect of the history of the Americas. And then when I read more, you will see why that is. Okay, you will see why that is. All right, and I'll explain to you why that is. Now, what little we do know strongly reflects the interests of the colonial regimes. All right, I'm going to repeat that. What little we do know strongly reflects the interests of the colonial regime. So basically what they're saying is this: the colonized societies, all right, the little relationship that we know between Indians, okay, of the Americas and so-called Africans, all right, it reflects the interests of the colonial regimes. So that means that they have no interest of telling us the truth. So that's why they have to keep pushing the narrative that we all came from Africa. All right. So we're going to clarify a lot of things today, and we're going to break some things down. All right. Thus, that blacks and Indians thought of each other is particularly difficult to rediscover, since the documentation of the relationship is sparse and always filtered through the gaze of what? Colonial observers. So in other words, that's why we have the term his story. It is not history. You see what I'm saying? Because our story is a mystery, and to them it's his story. All right. But we have to put things in perspective, and we have to read between the lines, and we have to know in certain eras, certain words meant different things. For instance, okay, at some point, white didn't have to do anything with people that had pale complexion. White was a status, and even people who were darker than us were considered white. All right, so we have to keep that in mind. All right, family, stick with me here, please. Okay. Now, in Brazil, blacks and Indians had much in common during the colonial regime. Both groups had been enslaved, and both suffered in the creation of the Portuguese colony and from the occupation of the land and the regime of export agriculture. Because remember, slavery was a business. It was about commerce. So they didn't care at some point what you look like. Almost every ethnic group, if not all, had encountered some form of slavery or indentured servantry at some point. Okay? All right, let's proceed. But the parallel sufferings and tribulations of the Afro-Brazilians and the Native Americans, again, in that sense, Native Americans, okay, was coined to be the real indigenous people until it took on a new connotation of what we call today of natives. So again, keep that in mind. All right, let me read that again. But the parallel sufferings and tribulations of the Afro-Brazilians and the Native Americans was only part of the story of the interaction, because the Portuguese crown and the colonists had also deployed the two groups in such a way as to foster the hostility and rivalry between them, often to the benefit of the colonial regime or the European settlers and their descendants, okay, which are now called what we call the natives today. All right, family, I'm going to break this down, okay, so that you guys could really paint the picture now in your mind what happened and how this transpired. Okay, now let's proceed. The complex deictic relationship between Afro-Brazilians and Native Americans cannot be understood by itself, but only within the context of the relationship of both of these groups to European societies and the colonial regime. All right. That's why there was a huge tension between Africans, between so-called Africans and so-called American Indians. Okay. Because we almost had the same complexion. All right. That was one of the big dilemmas. So follow me here now. All right. So it was a thing where the so-called powers there be were putting them against us and us against them. All right. So when you realize where that tension came from Africans and Americans, the original ones, then you will see exactly where all that came from. It was all about divide and conquer. Okay. Now, those, even when contacts took place and relationships, whether friendly or hostile, were formed between Afro-Brazilians and indigenous peoples, white society was constantly a kind of specter, a Banquo's ghost, always present and ever watchful. This was a reality that was implicitly understood, but not usually commented upon by contemporaries and Afro-Brazilian, Native Americans, and the Portuguese all developed strategies within that context to deal with the complexity of the forms that these relationships could take. We must first examine the colonial process of ethnic labeling and the hierarchy that it came to instantiate. All right, instantiate. Give me a second here, guys. The rain is coming down. I'm not sure if the rain is preventing you guys from hearing me. Do me a favor, please. If you could still hear me, go ahead and type 1 in the chat, please. If you could still hear me without the rain being an interference, let me know, please. Can anybody help me out here by just typing 1 in the chat if you could hear me clearly, please? All right. I know I'm talking to somebody out there. All right. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Zazie. Okay. So here we are. The colonial regime demonstrated a proclivity for creating new social categories and spaces in which the language of birth, heredity, status, color, religion, and perceived moral condition contributed to the creation of these ethnic or pseudo-racial categories and their ascribed attributes. Okay, so all these labels are pseudo labels. Okay, racial classifications. Keep that in mind. Thus, the term indios, okay, open parentheses, Indians, or other terms that were commonly used in Brazil, such as gentios, which is the Gentiles. So now when you go into the Bible and you start hearing about Gentiles, you see how I'm tying all this in together and letting you know that the Bible is not what you think it is. Okay? Jews, Gentiles, Israelites, all those things in there. Those are people that they give classifications. All right? Which I might add a note that Israelites are originally from, they're from Scotland and Ireland. The original so-called black people, that's where they are from. That is the descendant and the lineage of King James. He was the first Jacobite, okay, that changed his name to Israel, and that was his tribe. But anyway, that's another story, all right? So don't let anybody fool you and talk about, oh, we all Israelites in the Americas, we part of the 12 tribes. No, that ain't got nothing to do with us, all right? We were considered, okay, the Gentiles, all right? Now, let's proceed. Barbaros, which is Barbaros means barbarians. Tapoyos, non-Tupi speakers. All right, non-Tupi speakers. And when we go to Tupi, Tupi was a name that was used for in origin, its Portuguese origin for the Ani people. And as a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is when I read this paragraph, I'm going to show you that. Okay, now, or caboclos, rustics, were chronologically and regionally variables labels of Portuguese origin, created as a point of reference to place these peoples within hierarchical order of colonized a colonial society. All right. So they were creating classism. All right. A similar process also characterized dealing with the Africans, but Portuguese attitudes towards them had already been determined to some extent by prior contacts in Africa from the 15th century. In other words, they had contacts with the Africans before they had contacts with the American Indians. So they already had a predetermined conception of what Africans were. All right. And they classified them to be the worst of the worst. You feel me? And that created an animosity, okay, between Africans and American Indians. Okay? I'm breaking all this down for you. Whatever the tendency is to deal diplomatically with the African states and benignly with those rulers were converted to Christianity. Once again, nowhere in the Americas Christianity existed. Christianity was an army. Islam is an army. Catholicism is an army. And they are all part of the same Abrahamic religion. They all have the same mother. Okay? All right. Now, just putting things in perspective. These positive attitudes were undercut in practice by the civil status of most Africans that the Portuguese encountered. Okay? That situation led to an attitude of the deprecation of blacks who were associated with slave status. The term Negro itself implied a civil condition and was often, but not always, used as a synonym for slave. So Negro wasn't always synonymous with slave. Again, remember, in different areas, in different times, the words and their definitions changed. Okay? Thus, the commonly used label for indigenous people in the 16th century Brazil was what? Negro de terra. All right? And blacks of the land, meaning that the blacks of the land. So there you go. It is clearly stating that when the Europeans came, okay, they saw Negroes already here in the Americas. And Negros de terra means blacks of the land. Revealed a perception of them in a civil status more or less equivalent to Africans who were called what? Negros de Guinea. Okay? Negros de Guinea. Now, before I continue, I want you to know that there is a word or a term called Tupi, the Tupi Indians, which I just mentioned here. Okay? Let me go back to that before I continue here. The Tupi Indians. Let me see if I could highlight that for you. Tupi. Okay. Some of the names that they were called, you see, where it says non-Tupi speakers, well, Tupi. Tupi. Now, let us go here and let us look at the Ani people who were also called the Tupi by the Portuguese. I'm breaking some things down for you out here today. All right. Give me a second. Let me pull that up. All righty. Let us go look at the etymology of the word Annie, as in Anionwea. Okay, Annie, blackbird of the cuckoo family, native to what? American tropics, 1829 from Spanish or what? Portuguese Annie from Tupi. Okay, so the Annie people, all right, South America, Brazil, certain places like parts of Haiti. You see what I'm saying? So family, I'm just showing you the connection, how connected we original indigenous Americans were. And that's why I always stress the point with y'all, stop separating us. Okay, we got to stop allowing this colonial powers to keep separating us. Okay? So I just wanted to kind of show you the relevance and the coherence between Annie and Tupi that was mentioned in there. again, a black bird. And remember, a lot of our people identify themselves, if not by a geographical location, it would be by an animal, a bird, a bear, a wolf. You see what I'm saying? Because if that bird was one of the birds that was particularly in that area, so they call themselves the Ani people. That's the relationship, the symbiotic relationship we had with nature. Okay? All right. So let me stop sharing that and go back to what I was reading, and let's continue this here now. All right. Just putting things in perspective. All righty. Here we are. All right. Let's scroll all the way down. So now that you know, the Indians in Brazil, okay, they were considered Negros de terra. All right. So here it proves that the Indians were so-called black people. All right. And then the African Negroes, or the African so-called blacks, they call them Negro de Guinea. Okay. Now, later in 1757, the Indian mission villages in the Amazon region were secularized in the directory system, that the unjust and scandalous practice of calling Indian Negroes, implying thereby their servitude, was specifically prohibited. All right. So Indians were called Negroes. Go ask any of these natives, were they ever called Negroes? You see, it's so easy to debunk the lie and expose the lie. Okay? I don't have to go too deep to show that. You did. Now, in the parallel fashion, the first Africans brought to Brazil were sometimes called by the Portuguese tapunhuns, a word of Tupi origin that was employed as a quasi-tribal designation. Both the terms Negro de terra and Tampunhun disappeared as Indian slavery was replaced and large numbers of Africans arrived in the colony. So, like I told y'all before, the first slave trade in the Americas, it wasn't Africans, it wasn't Caucasians, it was actually American Indians. Okay? It was American Indians. But what they are living out is the fact that after the American Indians were enslaved, Queen Isabella, who is a mulatto, Ferdinand, who was a mulatto, they had a soft spot for the Indians. So therefore, they enslaved so-called white people and brought them into the Americas. But they were dying out. Couldn't stand the heat, couldn't stand the sun. So that's when they started bringing Africans. All right, family, you got to know the story. You see what I'm saying? You got to know the story and not his story. I'm putting this in perspective for you guys. All right, now let us go ahead and proceed. All right. Let me see. Both the terms Negro de terra and Tampunhun disappeared as Indian slavery was replaced and a large number of Africans arrived in the colony. While these categories tended to disappear or to transform over time, the process of contact between blacks and Indians, again, they were considering Africans to be blacks, and Indians did not produce a progeny of mixed origin called regionally Cafusos, Carabucos, Carabucas, or Cabures. In their own way, these new peoples and new categories further complicated the system of racial hierarchy in the colony. Because why? Africans, real Africans, and Negro de terra, which is the American Indians, they started to intermarry and have children. Okay? So regardless whether a lot of our people that call themselves black, regardless of whether they have African blood, they could claim being American Indians because they intermarried with our ancestors. Okay? So either way you look at it, they have a right to do that. As a matter of fact, they have more Indian blood. They have more of our blood in them than the natives do. Okay? The natives just came and took place on paper. I mean, I'm breaking this down to y'all. Okay? I'm telling y'all, man, don't play with me now. Confrontation and hostility. From the early stages of Portuguese conquest and settlement of Brazil, there were good reasons for hostility between Afro-Brazilians and Native Americans. Again, Native Americans is being used in its proper context at this time. All right. As black slaves began to arrive in some numbers after the 1560s, Indians were increasingly used as a means of controlling them. Okay, so now that hostility grew between Negroes de Guinea and Negroes de Terra, which is the American Indians, us, and the Africans, because why? We were being used to control the Africans. And that's why there is a disdain, okay, for us from certain Africans who know the history. Family, I'm putting all this in perspective for y'all. Okay? Putting all this in perspective for y'all. Let's continue. This function was simply an extension of the use of tame or allied Indians as protection against unreduced indigenous peoples or against foreign interlopers like the French, the Portuguese, like other colonial powers in the New World promoted a system of ethnic soldiering, turning some groups into a military force to patrol the territorial and social boundaries of the colony. It's like today having our people who look like us being policemen, but instead of them looking out for us, they're looking out for the corporation. Family, there's nothing new under the sun. Okay? Nothing new under the sun. All right? You are absolutely correct. Even the Negroes in Europe and England, they have more of our blood in them than these natives out here. And I'm going to prove that again. I keep telling y'all, don't play with me, man. I know my stuff. Okay? This piracy had begun in the 1520s, if not before. And after the arrival of Jesuits in 1549, the mobilization system was constructed using both independent allied groups as well as Indians in the aldeias or missionary-controlled villages. Portuguese policy had the effect of aggrandizing some tribes and creating new identities for those in the mission villages. Okay, it was always creating new identities. That's why we went through all these different changes: Negro, Black, African American, Afro American, niggers. I mean, family, trust me, it goes on and on. Colored. Okay, it go on and on, because what they did in the past, there's nothing new under the sun. All right. The ability to mobilize, because that's what it has always been about, mobilization. The ability to mobilize Indians for this purpose, as well as to deliver them as a labor force to crown and colonists, became a standard argument of the missionaries in their jurisdiction of control of Indians. Remember, like I told y'all, it's all about jurisdiction. It's about commerce, business. When you deal with jurisdiction, you're dealing with commercial terms. Okay? The use of indigenous peoples as a military force on the peripheries of empire as ethnic soldiers was common in the Americas, and the Portuguese were among the first of Europeans to employ it effectively. In other words, they used us, okay, as ethnic soldiers, okay, to control our African cousins. Okay? So now you could start seeing the relationship between us and our African cousins and why there was such a hatred. All right? Now, the technique was developed early on the Brazilian littoral, but then extended across the continent as occupation and settlement expanded. Now, there alone, I could say, hey, that sentence alone solidifies that all or over 90% of the indigenous people in the Americas were so-called Black. Because guess what? It says what? The technique was developed early on the Brazilian littoral, but then extended across the continent as occupation and settlement expanded. How could they have applied that in the rest of the continent if those so-called Indians were not so-called Black? Family, when you read, you have to read with understanding. Don't just read to finish. Like I always tell y'all, read to get into the information and get into the information so you have an understanding of the information. Okay, and that's what we are breaking down here today. All right, anthropologist Neil Whitehead has pointed out Such policies had the effect of creating and sharpening tribal divisions and hostilities among indigenous peoples and demobilizing them against European rivals. In colonies where Africans constituted a significant slave population, ethnic soldering also became a key element in the controlling and policing of Africans. Okay? Isn't that what we have today? But then they mixed us all into one category, right? In the struggle between the Jesuit missionaries and the Portuguese colonies for control of the domesticated Indians, both sides argued that they were best able to mobilize the potential labor and military usefulness of those indigenous peoples under Portuguese control. From the 1580s, Jesuits observers made this point constantly, emphasizing the service performed for God and your majesty by converting and domesticating those Gentiles, which is us, the so-called Indians. Isn't that in the Bible? Family, y'all got to open up your minds, man. Who gave us the Bible? King James. King James was what? A so-called black man from England, from Europe, a king. It wasn't Caucasians that was doing this to us. Y'all better wake up and realize, man. That's why I say not every skin folk is skin folk. You dig? All right? The Jesuit provincial, and while I say Gentiles, again, King James, the first Jacobite, the Israelite, okay, he promised his tribes the promised land, which is our land. Okay? But they did not come here as slaves. They came here as indentured servants. It's only when they came here to work on contracts for 7 years. But that contract was reneged. When I say reneged, meaning that it wasn't kept. Okay? They didn't keep the contract, so they enslaved them. But they did not come here as slaves. They came here as indentured servants. Even most of the Africans who came here, they did not come on no slave ship like you see in Roots. They came here as indentured servants. There were people that came that left their country, and there were spoken deals in front of their kings and their leaders. We are giving them a better life and their family. We are asking you for some people on this new mission we are going on in this so-called new world. These people did not come here as slaves. It's only when they came here, okay, the servitude or the terms and conditions of the servitude or indenture, okay, it became slaves, okay, because now they didn't want to honor that 7-year contract, more so of a verbal contract, I'm assuming. All right, so then they became, now it was enforced into slavery, meaning that against their own will. But indentured servitude wasn't slavery, it was consented. Okay, let's just put this in perspective. Now, the Jesuits provincial in 1601, in celebrating his orders, service in the pacification of the Pitaquas of Rio Grande and Pernambuco, claimed over 50,000 in 150 villages had been brought under Portuguese control by the Jesuits' efforts. He argued that, okay, with the great obedience that the gentio of Brazil, meaning that the Gentiles of Brazil have for this religious, that it is to be expected not only their conversion to our holy faith. In other words, they were converted. We were not Christians. You see what I'm saying? That's why I don't know why these so-called people here, they can't get it. Christianity was an army. Okay, you see what I'm saying? That's why it's called religion. Legion is an army. It's a squad. And religion is bringing back that old-time religion. They even give you the song, bringing that old-time religion. Give me that old. You see, old people don't know what they're saying, man. That's why I say God's people perish for the lack of knowledge, family. But we are not going to turn that into a religious thing right now. Let us stay focused, Chief. Stay focused, right? But also, great service to your majesty, helping to defend those areas from the French and English who infest them, and from the Guinea blacks who rebel, and from Indians that resist. So you see what they did? They made some Indians who were rebellious enemies of those who converted to Christianity. I'm breaking this down for y'all, okay? They also had to be the enemies of the Negroes, the Guinea, the Africans. You did. And also the French and the English. Because these people They strategized. The French, the English, they were all part of one same empire, so to speak. Okay? So they would war, but then they would come together and say, well, this is what we're going to do. We are going to pretend we enemies, okay, fighting for this, fighting for that. You could take a certain part, you could take a certain part, but they don't know what we are doing. In their eyes, we are enemies, but they don't know we are friends. Is the same thing like today. The left wing, the right wing, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, left wing, right wing, same bird. Family is the same trick that's being played on us over and over and over again, and we keep falling for the same trick. Come on, man. Let us proceed. In their struggle against enslavement of Indians, the Jesuits emphasized that such policy would drive indigenous peoples from the coast and create a vacuum that would allow Black slaves, Africans, to rise with the whole coast, as they have attempted in some place with great danger to the Portuguese, who in order to defend themselves turned to the brazies, or are the walls of bulwarks, emphasize mine, of the state according to Portuguese that live there. Okay, this metaphor of domesticated Indians as protective barrier or wall was repeated throughout what? The colony's history. Isn't that the same thing that they did here? They pacify our people, and now they got our people fighting for them. Come on, man. How many times are we going to fall for the okadokes, man? How many times are we going to do that? Man, I'm telling y'all, man. Let's proceed, man. Knowledge is power, okay? This idea of using Indians as both a potential labor force and as a defensive cordon appealed to the colonists and sugar planters as well as the missionaries. In 1603, the absentee donatary of Porto Seguro, the Duke of Aveiro, complained that his holdings in Brazil did not prosper because he lacked Gentiles. In other words, he lacked Indians, okay, who could populate and defend them. All right, despite legislation that privileged the Jesuits, he asked for and received the permission for the colonists in his captaincy to bring Indians from the interior for this purpose. What's the interior? The United States. So I'm showing y'all how we are connected. Okay, the Indians in the so-called South America, so-called Central America, so-called the Caribbean, and Indians on the mainland. That's why I keep telling y'all, we got to stop separating ourselves, man. Okay, this is an art of war, and we keep falling for the same thing over and over again. All right. Similar arguments were made by other sugar plantations and by royal officials as well. But in the general crown, policy supported control by the Jesuits. As the numbers of African and Afro-Brazilian workers increased on the northeastern plantations after the 1560s, the planters, the Jesuits, and the colonial state all increasingly came to view domesticated Indians as an essential element of colonial control and essential for the colony's success. Okay? Now, Fray Vicente do Salvador, Brazil's first historian, claimed that the depredations of Moradin bands of rebellious slaves was also limited by the fear of Indians. Okay, because I'm telling you, we are fierce warriors, man. You see what I'm saying? I'm just letting y'all know the type of blood we got in us. In the late 16th century, as colonists and Jesuits competed for control of the Indians under Portuguese control, each side justifies its stewardship by arguing that it were best suited to mobilize Indians as a defensive force against threat of the foreign interlopers like the French or the Dutch on the coast, the unreduced tribes of the interior or domestic enemies. Isn't that what they have in there? Foreign and domestic enemies? Family, the language is still the same. It's just a different era. The slaves of the growing number of sugar plantations. In Bahia, for example, the Jesuits argued that their aldeas or mission towns of Santo Antonio in Jaguaribe and Sao Sebastião in Capanema had been established and developed because they stood on the frontier with the hostile Amores, and indigenous people who had kept the southern areas of the captaincy in constant danger. All right, the Amores. All right, whooping butts. Okay, the Jesuits had made the service of their charges available to colonial state. In 1614, Indians from the Jesuit aldea of Sao Paulo had been mobilized to destroy the runaway slave community in the Bahamian area. The colonists, anxious to control Indian labor and no less anxious to have auxiliaries to be used against still hostile groups and against slaves, argued against the Jesuit villages and against Jesuit control of the Indians. In 1610, for example, the town council of the Paraba contested legislation designed to the end enslavement of Indians and noted the great value Indians provided to the crown as workers as counterbalance to the enslaved Africans, the so-called Negroes de Guinea. So once again, I'm showing you the relationship between us and Africans and why they had this disdain against us. Okay? Because we were favored, because it was our indigenous land. And we were convinced and used, okay? In other words, yes, we sold out, all right, to help enslave our cousins. Okay? The counselors argued that those enslaved were cannibals who had joined with Lutheranians, all right, the French. Okay, remember at that time, Lutheranians were French, or Lutherans were French, to attack the Portuguese, and that the Jesuits' aldeas had only made the Indians more susceptible to sickness. In this last particular, they were probably correct, but their concern was more with the services the Indians could provide than with their health. Both Jesuits and colonists agreed on the utility of the domesticated Indians. They only differed on who might best mobilize them. Diego de Campos Moreno, who prepared a report for the crown in 1612 on the state of Brazil, was greatly in favor of the integration of indigenous peoples into the fabric of the colonial society. Okay? In other words, if they help us, we will make them part of our society. Isn't it the same thing we're having today? As he stated, the Indians that live together with the whites are not only better Christians, raising themselves and their children as such, but they also learn the mechanic trades and give benefit to the royal treasury and great assistance in the use of arms on every occasion on the coast and in the interior Satoa of their lands. This defensive function of colonial Indians, along with their potential as a labor force, was manipulated by both the colonial settlers and by the Jesuits. The struggle between the contending sides became a theme throughout much of the history of the colonial Brazil. What was not in the contention, however, was the perceived value of the Indians as a defensive bulwark and a counterweight to the growing population of enslaved Africans. This was made particularly apparent by a petition of a group of settlers from the Jaguaribe region of Bahia, who in 1613 sought the king's intervention when they complained that the Jesuits had moved their missionary villages away from the frontier, where these settlers had their sugar mills and farms, and these Indians, both men, had served to guard the frontier and to control the black captives, okay, who might rise to flee and join with the French and other enemies. In 1633, Duarte Gomez de Silveira, representing the colonists of Paraba, penned a long memorial on the use of Indians to control the growing number of Africans. He put the matter clearly. There is no doubt that without Indians in Brazil, there can be no Guinea blacks. All right? Or better said, there can be no Brazil. For without the blacks, nothing can be done. In other words, without the African slaves, nothing can be done. And they are 10 times more numerous than the whites. And if now it is costly to control them with the Indians who they greatly fear. You see what I'm saying? So now y'all see what's going on. We are a different breed of so-called Negroes. The Negro de Terra and the Negro de Guinea are two different types of Negroes. The African Negro is passive. We got that red Indian blood in us. It's a different kind of blood. No shade. I'm just telling you what it is. All right. I'm just breaking it down to y'all. We are a different genetic breed. Okay. Now, what will happen without the Indians? The next day they will rebel, and it is a difficult task to overcome domestic enemies. Man, y'all think it's a game. This theme of utility of indigenous troops for the defense of Brazil against foreign and domestic enemies was continually repeated. Is that the same thing they're doing? What? They have cops that look like us in the hood, don't know our history, and abusing our indigenous brothers and sisters. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. You see what I'm saying? Nothing changed, but people perish for the lack of knowledge. In 1697, for example, Father Pedro Rodriguez of the Company of Jesus, again, Jesus claimed Jesus, that the three principal enemies of the Portuguese were the French, the unconquered Almore, which is the Indians, a group of Indians that fought, all right, precariously, and the blacks in Lombos, and that the best defense against all of them was the use of the Aldea Indians, that is, Indians under the guidance of the missionaries. Okay, the mobilization of Indians by the state, usually under the direction of the Jesuits for the purpose of slave control, was paralleled by the employment under the arrangement as well. Now, keep in mind, the so-called Jews that we have today that call themselves Jewish, that wasn't them in that day, okay? That wasn't them. They just took that title, all right? I'm putting all this in perspective, okay? Indians were often used as slave catchers by the plantation owners on an individual basis. That's why these natives telling you they own slaves and they control slaves, because they're pretending to be us. You see what I'm saying? They never control Africans. We were the ones controlling Africans, okay? We were the one chasing Africans down. You see what I'm saying? Because we were put in place to control them, all right? And I am going to apologize on behalf of my ancestors, okay, for taking part in doing this to our African cousins. I'm going to apologize on their behalf, okay? Because we have to realize what happened in the past, and we have to be able to mend those differences and learn to forgive each other and unite, okay? So I'm big enough to do that on behalf of my ancestors. You feel me? Now, we have some indication of how the contractual arrangements worked from the entries in the yearly account registers maintained at Engenho Segep de Conde, one of the largest Bahamian sugar estates. Entries in these records speak of payments in small sums as well as shirts, rum, knives, trinkets paid to Indians for various tasks, including the capture and return of runaway slaves. Okay? Entries such as one for the harvest of 1629 to 1630 for money given to 3 Indians for tying up a black woman who had run off, or for that of 1630 to 1631 into some Indians who captured 3 blacks escaped from the fazenda, highlight the nature of relationships. So when you see certain so-called black men today, okay, attacking us, a lot of that blood is in them. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of them know the history, not all of them, but the system know the history. So they have to continuously put us against each other. You see what I'm saying? And then a lot of what's happening is a revenge, so to speak. They know the history, some of them, okay? They know the history. So what you did to us, we are going to do to you, all right? Indigenous peoples became a force for the control of the Afro-Brazilians' slave population in 2 ways. First, the unreduced groups of the Brazilian interior created a kind of barrier for both whites and blacks, limiting the extension of colonial control, but also creating an obstacle for the formation of runaway communities. This situation, along with the predatory economies of many of these escapes village, probably contributed to the fact that most of the runaway communities remained relatively close to the plantations and urban centers of the settlement. The fact that untamed Indians provided a barrier for both blacks and whites did not prevent colonial authorities from contemplating the function of hostile groups as means of slave control. In a letter probably written around 1687, authorities in Pamamboko, anxious to eliminate the great runaway community of Palmares, called not only for the localization of domesticated Indians and members of the Indian regiment of Henrique Camarua in the region of Palmares as means of control, but also the use of wild Indians, the Gentios Bravos. The strategy they suggested reveals colonial perception of how the problem could be handled. There is also much to consider that the wild Indians that surround Palmares and all of the Mocambos of blacks are their bitterest enemies and wish not only to destroy them, but to eat them. And with these Gentiles, it is possible to enter into communication and to persuade them to go against the blacks, offering them aquidente knives and other things, and blacks surrounded, and in this way squeezed between the Gentiles of the interior and our forces from seashore will wish to surrender rather than die. This strategy was somewhat unrealistic and difficult to accomplish. Much more feasible was the employment of the domestic Indians, okay? Those who had been brought under Portuguese control and settled in Jesuit aldeas or on the lay control village that provided a readily available force for controlling the slave population. Sometimes Indian groups were moved long distance for this purpose. In the late 1590s, 800 Bowen from the powerful Tupian speaking Portuguese of Pernambuco, who had aided the Portuguese against the French, was sent to southern Bahia to provide protection against the raids of the Amares. By the time they arrived, the principal threat had passed, and they were eventually distributed not only in Rios, but in the Bahamian sugar zone of the Reconcavo as a labor and military force. Some under their chief Zorabebe were then deployed against the Mocambo of escaped blacks on the Itapikoru River. Zorobebe then sold some of those he captured for a horse, clothing, and military trappings. While it is difficult to measure the effectiveness of the policy of using Indians to control African rebelliousness and insurrection, the lack of large-scale revolts onto the early 19th century suggests that the proximity of Indians did have some influence, but if such movements were lacking, there was no lack of individual flight and runaways. The military used domesticated Indians, especially to suppress slave resistance, found its most common form in the employment as scouts, barons, and auxiliary troops in campaigns to stamp out runaway slave communities, usually called in Brazil Mocambos or Quilombos. Virtually every maroon community in Brazil was attacked or destroyed with the help of Indians under Portuguese command. A major feature in the anti-Mocambo measures was the creation of the force of slave catchers or bush captains. These officers called variously Capitoa do Campo, Capitoa do Mato, Capitoa dos Assalto, were often themselves black or mulatto freedmen, but they generally operated with the support of Indian auxiliaries. As early as 1612, the governor of Brazil received a request to create a Capitoa do Campo in all of the 8 parishes of Pernambuco. Each of these officials were to have 20 Indian families under his control to help with their slave catching activities. Similar arrangements became standard practice throughout many areas of Brazil. In the 1660s, for example, the court of Obedos as governor of the colony, organized a series of campaigns against Macombos in which Indians from the Torre de Garcia Davila, from Aldea of Santo Antonio, and even some veterans of the Indian regiment of Henrique Camaroa were to be employed. All right. The idea that lay beneath the employment of Indians and freed blacks as slave catchers and as a bulwark against unreduced Indians and fugitive slaves was that only such force could be effective in the kind of guerrilla war that such actions implied. In a projected expedition mounted in the 1590s that would use Potagua warriors from Pernambuco against the Amore of Ilhéus. It was generally agreed that the campaign was impossible unless it was done with other Indians, forest beyonds, Becho do Mato, like them. Similar arguments were made throughout the colony existence. The Portuguese Overseas Council, discussing the need to subdue the region of Mato Grosso, agreed in 1744, for example, that the proper people to make war against Gentiles are other Gentiles among with some whites, and the Bororo, because of their bravery and what? Loyalty, are the best of this. You see what I'm saying? That's why I tell you, we are a loyal people, but we are also fierce warriors. So they had to put us to play against each other. Family, man, y'all better know, man. All right? For real. Okay? Y'all better know what's going on. All right? Similar arguments. Give me a second here. All right? Similar arguments were made for employing Indians on freed blacks against escaped Afro-Brazilians in a self-congratulatory letter of C. circa 1695. Domingos Jorge Velho, the leader of the expedition that defeated Palmares, claimed that his troops were the most effective against Maroons because of the martial skills of the Gentillo under his command. So you see, we had that martial arts skills, man. Y'all better recognize who we are and who we were. All right? Y'all better recognize the Gentiles had that martial arts skills. All right? And that the Paulistas and the Indians would be like the Great Wall of China against the hostile Indians and the fugitive blacks, except that they would be more effective and less subject to the force and nature than the famous Asian fortification. But such policies were not without difficulties and risk. We can use a Bahamian anti-Mocambo campaign of 1636 as an example of ways in which Indian forces could be mobilized against runaway communities, but also of the dangers inherent in doing so. In 1636, the governor of Brazil and the town council of Salvador mounted an expedition to suppress a large and apparently well-organized Maroon community in the Bahamian interior. Forces were raised in various locales, and Indians from Jesuit villages, as well as those on the secular leadership, were enlisted. Many slaves were recaptured and then sold or redeemed, thus generating a large sum of money to be divided among the members of the expedition. This included Alfonso Rodriguez, captain of his Indians, and Luis de Carrera, captain of the Aldea, who received 80 melreres to be divided among the Indians who participated. Half of that sum went to the Jesuit representative to be divided among 82 Indians from the Jesuit aldeas, and smaller amounts went to the Sequeira and Rodriguez for the Indians under their command. This expedition also revealed the difficulties and the contingencies of such techniques. As part of the expedition, Robelio Diaz had led his people, who he described as Gentillo and Tapuyos, that is uncovered, non-Tupi-speaking heathens, into the interior. They had encountered a large body of blacks, or Tapun Honos, and the fierce fight ensued. Many of the Maroons were killed or wounded, and 40 taken prisoner, including their leaders. All were taken back to the Macombo, but there were no jail in the encampment where the prisoners could be kept securely, and Diaz feared his own Tapoyos, who he called savages, who were also becoming ill. He was forced to deal with the Macombo leader who promised to bring into camp those fugitives still free in the forest. This he did, but the Indians and Diaz himself sickened, and eventually Diaz had to seek further Indian auxiliaries drawn from villages in Sakip de El Rey to the north. The pattern of using Indian troops as guides, auxiliaries, and as ethnic soldiers forming the bulk of anti-Macumbo forces became standard practice in Brazil. Freire Vicente del Salvador, Brazil's first historian, wrote that the only reason that the depredations of escaped slaves were not even worse was the fear that they have of the Indians who, with a Portuguese captain, seek them out and return them to their masters. They wasn't even afraid of the Portuguese. They were afraid of the Indians, okay? Because that's the type of spirit that we have. I want y'all to know where we came from, man. I want y'all to know what kind of blood we got running in us, okay? Now, in Bahia and Pernambuco, such tactics had been employed from the 16th century forward, and by the 18th century, a regular system of mobilizing settled Indians for this purpose was firmly in place. Now, if all the way up to the 18th century, where the hell these natives talking about they own slaves? Where they came from? So, family, y'all got to stop falling for these lies, man. Stop falling for these lies, okay? The Macombo called the Amadelos Whole Barroca de Tuto in Itapua, just north of Salvador, was destroyed in 1764, using Indian auxiliaries from a village of Jaguarip, as well as militia unit of Indians. In 1789, when 50 of the 300 slaves at Engenho, Santana in El Hios ran off and formed a Macombo, the owner at first tried to return them to their destiny, but the peaceful means, but then sought the aid of the local Capitillas de Mato, along with the Indians of the village of Basolos, and Alavenca. In 1806, near the Rio das Contas in El Hios, the Quilombo of Oitizero was destroyed. The Tropa da Conquista do Gentillo Barro de Padre Branco, a contingent of Queriri Indians under the command of Antonio Andrade Consequello. These two well-documented Bohemian cases are simply representatives of the general pattern found throughout other captaincies of the colony. All right. So, guys, I'm not going to read the entire thing because I have this in the description for you guys. But I just wanted to read some of that as an introduction for you. You could go ahead and read the rest of it. But I just want to kind of show you, all right, some of the story and then how his story is not adding up with what they are telling us. All right. And you have these so-called natives nowadays, okay, trying to put us in Africa. Why? Because they trust me, they were told our story. You feel me? They were told our story. That's why they constantly have to call us black, because they know we were not the ones that were called black. And if you listen to the video when I called the Cherokee Nation, he kept saying black, 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 knowing damn well I wasn't black. You see what I'm saying? So y'all gotta peep the game. Peep the game. When they call you black, that means you're African. And it also means that you are dead in law. You see what I'm saying? So y'all better peep the game, man. Anyway, I'm gonna stop sharing this because I already, like I said, I have that in the chat already. Okay. And then we're going to go to another one that I want to read. Okay. We're going to go to the Jack Forbes right now, because I kind of wanted to break that down for y'all. But before I go anywhere, I want to break down for you indigenous, why we have to be mindful of when we use the term indigenous, we cannot just use it blatantly by itself. It cannot be an isolated word. So let me go to indigenous first. Okay. Let me go to indigenous first, the etymology of that. Let me see something. Oh yes, family. I'm drinking some water. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm drinking some water. Thank you for the concern. Okay. Let me show you guys the etymology of the word. Oh no, that's Annie. What I was saying, etymology of, oh yeah, indigenous. 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 So we have to be mindful of when we use the word indigenous. Okay. Let me break that down for y'all. Okay. So indigenous, simply put, adjective, born or originating in a particular place. Stop. That's it. Right there. Stop. Indigenous has two meanings. That's why every time you hear me use the term indigenous, you hear me put original in front of it. Okay? All right? Again, family, I'm going to repeat what I just said. Why do you think every time I use the term indigenous, I always put original in front of it? Because I'm a wordsmith. Okay? The UN, this is the trick that they use on us. They have this so-called indigenous right. They have these people calling themselves indigenous, but they cannot put original in front of indigenous, because all indigenous means to be born, which is what? Native. All native means is to be born in the new era. Back then, a native was indigenous in its original sense, but it has taken a new form, okay, into this society, which you see clearly who they call natives now. I'm not hating the natives. I ain't got nothing against them. Because they were miseducated just like us. But a lot of their elders know the truth. And that's what burns me. They will not come up and fess up and speak the truth. You see what I'm saying? They will not. So with that being said, indigenous means born. So anybody could be indigenous. Even a Caucasian could be indigenous. Even a pale man could be indigenous. As long as they are born in the Americas, they are indigenous. However, this is what separates them from us. We are original indigenous people. So therefore, indigenous, born or originating in a particular place. 1640s from Latin, indigenous, born in a country, native. That's all native means, to be born. Okay, from Latin indigena, sprung from the land, native as a noun. A native literally means what? Born or born in a place, in within, to beget, produce, give birth, beget, with derivatives referring to pronunciation and familial and tribal groups. Tribal groups, remember, tribes came from Europe. That's why they have a right to call themselves natives. But we had clans. Oh, man, I'm telling y'all, man. I don't know, man. I give thanks to my ancestors, man. I give thanks to my ancestors, for just giving me that ability, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, come on, man. Wow. Okay. So, all right. So, therefore, whenever you use the term indigenous, never just use indigenous by itself. You want to use original indigenous. So it separates you from a native, identity. You see what I'm saying? There's always a madness behind my vernacular. All right. Always keep that in mind. I don't just say things just because. All right. All right. Just wanted to drop that on y'all. Okay. Now, let me go to the next one. Let me stop sharing my screen. All right, here we go. We're going to do some more reading, family. All right, we got about 13 pages we got to go through. All right, let me just open that up a little more. All right, cool. All right. Now, we're going to look at the terms Negro, Black, to include persons of Native Americans ancestry in Anglo North America. Jack D. Forbes. Okay. Now, in 1854, the California State Supreme Court sought to bar all non-Caucasians from equal citizenship and civil rights. The court stated the word black may also include all Negroes, but the term Negro does not include all black persons. Man, you see, let me tell y'all something, man. Y'all, man, listen. Hold on for a second, family. Hold on for a second. Let me just drink some water, please. And my battery is actually dying, so give me a second. Let me just get my charger, all right? Hold on for a second while I take a quick little intermission. In the meantime, do me a favor, just go ahead and share, please, okay? Tag some people in there. Okay. All right, I'm ready to rock and roll. All right, guys. If you're ready to rock and roll, family, do me a favor, type some sevens in the chat. If you're ready to rock and roll, type some sevens in the chat. If you're with me, type some sevens in the chat. If you're with me, type some sevens in the chat right now. Let's do this. And like I said, guys, I don't want nothing from you. I just want you to know who you are, okay? I don't want a donation. I'm good. I just want to make sure that my people are confident when they say that the original people of the land, they have foundation to prove what they are talking about. Even if you cannot pinpoint your clan personally, it's okay. But with this general information, you have enough information to stand your grounds. That is my ultimate goal, because a lot of that stuff, because of paper genocide, you feel what I'm saying? A lot of us may not be able to pinpoint and do that exact, genealogy trail. And it's okay. It's all right. Don't feel bad. But I'm giving you enough information to know that you have enough to stand on your own. All right, where you could debunk a lot of the lies that are being taught to your children and taught to us. And trust me, this is just the beginning. I got documents from Congress, like I'm talking about verbatim, breaking down what they did to the blacks, who they call the Indians. I got all that. Like I told y'all before, I just took a break because I feel like it doesn't matter what you call yourself. If you're broke, you ain't got no voice. You see what I'm saying? But the ancestors is bringing me back to this information. And there's a reason for that, because like I told y'all, I got a big surprise for y'all, and y'all gonna love this. Okay, so let's proceed. Now, let's read this again. What does it say? Huh? What does it say? Let's look at this. Okay. Now, the word black may include all Negroes, but the term Negro does not include all black persons. Now, you see why I had to go and break down a few things before? So you could know that all Negroes are not black, because you have Negro de Terra and you have Negro de Guinea. Negro de Guinea are the people they call black. Even if they are not black, they are just darker brown people who are a whole lot darker than us. They are our cousins. You see what I'm saying? And yes, we did them foul. I will agree to that. But look at the circumstances that we were in. We were at war. All right. And I'm still not making any excuses for my ancestors who did that. That's why I'm apologizing. I'm their voice today. I'm apologizing for what they did to our African cousins. Okay? Now, so keep in mind, the word black may include all Negroes, but the term Negro does not include all persons. Okay? We are of the opinion that the word white, Negro, mulatto, black person, whenever they occur in our Constitution, must be taken in their generic sense. Okay? That the words black person in the 14th section must be taken as contraire, distinguished from white, and necessarily includes all the races other than Caucasian. Okay? Now, convoluted as the quote may be, it tends to express a strong tendency in the history of the United States. And let's keep in mind, the United States is not a country, it's not a nation, it's a corporation. Towards creating two broad classes of people, white and non-white citizens and non-citizen or semi-citizen. The tendency to create a two-caste society often clashed with the reality of a territory which includes many different types of people of what? All colors and different degrees of intermixture of European, American, African, Asian. Okay? Native American people, whether of unmixed ancestry or mixed with other stocks, were at times affected by the tendency to create a purely white black society or system or societal system, especially when living away from a reservation or the ancestral homeland. Okay? Now, in the British slave colonies of North America along the Atlantic coast, many persons of American ancestry were at times classified as what? Blacks, Negroes, mulattoes, or people of what? Color. Isn't that what they call us today, family? Like I said, man, I don't have to go too far to prove to you that we are the original Indians of this land. I don't have to go too far. I'm going to read that again. In the British slave colonies of North America along the Atlantic coast, many persons of American ancestry were at all times classified. You see what it says? It didn't say were at times classified as black, Negro, mulattoes, or people of what? Color. And these terms were, of course, used for people of African descent, because at some point they put us in all categories to make sure that we, the original people of this land, we blend in with our cousins from Africa. Okay? So now they could just put us all in a boat. Oh, you're all Africans. You have no tie to this land. So now it's ours. Okay? Now, the manner in which Americans and part Americans were sometimes classified as mulattoes and people of color. Now, keep in mind, back then, a mulatto, all right, was anybody who intermarried with an Indian. I'm talking about an African and an American Indian, okay, were considered a mulatto. Okay? Keep that in mind. All right? I'm breaking this down for y'all. Again, in different eras, okay, different centuries, okay, words meant different things. All right? All right. The manner in which Americans and part Americans were sometimes classified as mulattoes and people of color from New England to South Carolina and in the Spanish Empire are explored elsewhere. The purpose here is to what? Illustrate how the term Negro has also been applied to the people of what? American descent. They didn't say African descent. American descent. In other words, they are insinuating that we are the descendants of the ancient Americans. But I beg to differ. Let me correct. We are not the descendants, because we are not descending, we are ascending. So therefore, we are the ascendants of our ancestors. Man, I'm not sure if y'all ready for Chief today, man. You know what I'm saying? But I'm gonna give it to y'all like it's hot pepper. Okay. So y'all ready for the sauce? I don't know if y'all ready for the sauce, but I'm gonna give it to y'all. Okay. We are not descendants. we are ascendants, okay? Because we are versions of them and we are ascending. We are not descending, okay? Again, the words have power. If you say you are descending, that means you are devolving. But I'm not descending, baby. I'm evolving, so therefore I'm ascending. All right? My ancestors are my descendants, and I am their ascendants. Woo! Woo! I'm not sure if they're ready for this, Chief. All right, let's go. Explorations in the ethnic studies, all right? And they have the volume 7 number, July 1984. Everything is there. You could do your own research. I'm just giving you the information, all right? Now, the probability that Native Americans were quite commonly called Negroes. Once again, the possibility that Native Americans quite commonly called Negroes is very much supported by what? Portuguese usage. During the colonial period, Brazilian Indians were repeatedly referred to as Negroes or Negros de terra, Negroes of the land. You see what I'm saying? Negroes of the land. A great many examples from the 16th and the latter centuries are cited by George Frederici in his analysis of Portuguese sources. These do not have to be repeated here, but suffice to say that it was common or so common that finally in 1755 a royal decree had to be issued as follows. Among the regrettable practices which have resulted in the disparagement of the Indians, one prime abuse is the unjustifiable and scandalous practice of calling them Negroes. It was a scandalous practice. Perhaps by so doing, the intent was no other than to induce in them the belief that by their origins they have been destined to be the slaves of whites, as is generally conceded to be the case of blacks from the coast of Africa. I don't think let me see if y'all perceive what I'm reading here. Okay, let me see if y'all perceive what I'm reading here. Okay, we're going to read this again. Okay, among the regrettable practices which have resulted in the disparagement of the Indians, which is us, one prime abuse is the unjustifiable and scandalous practice of what? Calling them Negroes. Calling us Negroes. Why? Perhaps by so doing, the intent, now what's the intentions of calling us Negroes and black? Was no other than what? To induce in them the belief, okay? In other words, it's a belief, just like what? It's a theory, just like we came from Africa on slaves, roots. That's a belief. It's a theory, which I have debunked, which is not true, which I'm proving it here again, that their origins, they had been destined to be slaves of whites, as is generally conceded to be the case of black from the Ivory Coast. Okay? But even before blacks from the Ivory Coast of the coast of Africa came into the Americas, guess what? Okay, there were also whites that came before our African cousins. You see, they're not putting that in the narrative, but I'm letting y'all know this. All right? So when they call us blacks and Negroes, is to again induce the idea that we all came from Africa on slaves. That's why again, you don't see a rabbit taking its babies to a lion to get educated, because it may have a fear that the lion is going to eat the baby rabbits. So why did we take, or why are we still taking our children and putting them, okay, to be taught by a system that's literally here to destroy us? Okay? They will not tell us the truth. But Chief Kalanago is breaking all this down today in ways you may not have heard before. Okay? Now, let's proceed. The directors will not permit henceforth that anybody may refer to an Indian as a Negro, nor that themselves may be used this epithet among themselves, as is currently the case. This Portuguese usage is extremely significant, not only because American or part American slaves could be referred to as Negroes in the early shipment records, but also because it very much affects one's analysis of population statistics in colonial Brazil, where in fact the categories of Negro and mulatto must have often included domesticated or enslaved Indians and mixed bloods. Okay? Now, insofar as the term Negro became synonymous with slave or servile status, because it wasn't always considered that, it lost any specific color reference and became a general term of abuse, darker people preferring to be called preto as a result. It is highly likely that the Spaniards also referred to slaves generally as Negroes in the Caribbean, and that the Dutch took over the same general practice, since Negro and nega or neger, okay, N-E-G-E-R, were not Dutch words and had no immediate equivalent except SWAT. Okay, SWAT. Remember when I show you all what SWAT means? SWAT means dirty. SWAT means sordid. SWAT came black SWAT. They're all the same thing. All right. And Donker and Bruin, a Dutch, French, Spanish dictionary of 1639 has the following entry for Spanish Negro. Noir means black. Sombre, obscure, forescare, brun, French, SWAT, Donker, Bruin, Dutch. Thus, a Spanish Negro could be translated as a dark or brown as well as black, which is SWAT. Undoubtedly, this usage facilitated making reference to all slaves as Negroes or negas in the Dutch language. Okay? Now, moreover, it is significant that a Spaniard residing in Antwerp in the early 17th century, the preparer of dictionaries saw Negro as being translated in a number of ways in both French and Dutch. By the latter half of the 16th century, the English were referring to the people of Africa as Ethiopians. Okay? That's why when, what's his name? Varazona and wrote the letter to France, and he said the people are unlike the Ethiopians. I mean, I got so much documents to show when the people came here, what they saw. Okay? Now, it said, by the latter half of the 17th century, the English were referring to the people of Africa as Ethiopians, Blackamoors, Negroes, Moors, somewhat interchangeably. Okay? And just for the record, American Indians are not Moors. Stop listening to that foolishness. Okay? Period. Now, Negro gradually came to be the dominant term, especially after exhaustive contact with the, give me a second here, with the Spanish and the Portuguese. What is not clear is the extent to which the term Negro was consciously translated as black. The automatic association of Negro with black color cannot be assumed since black or Africans are actually of medium or dark brown color. Okay? Africans are actually of medium or dark brown color. So like I told y'all before, it doesn't matter how you think our African cousins are black. They are not black. It is a dark brown. Black people don't exist. Okay? Just putting that in perspective. In any case, another association gradually arose, and that was between Negro and slave. Early legislation commonly referred to Negro and other slaves, or Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves. Over the years, Negro and black both became synonymous with enslavement. In 1702, an observer wrote that the wealth of Virginia consisted of slaves or Negroes. I'm going to repeat that. The wealth of Virginia in 1702, an observer wrote that the wealth of Virginia consisted of slave or Negroes. By 1806, Virginia judges ruled that a person who was of white appearance was to be presumed free, But in the case of a person visibly appearing to be of the slave race, is incumbent upon him to make out his freedom. Okay? In 1819, South Carolina judges stated flatly the word Negroes has a fixed meaning as slave. What the English meant by the term Negro when they first began to use it is not clear. Certainly, it was not then synonymous with slave, as a great many persons so classified were free. Okay? Both in England, all right, keep that in mind, both in England and in Virginia. Did it mean an African, a black person, or any dark-skinned individual? Today, the term is not widely employed in Britain, although the word black is used to refer the people of various skin colors from all of South Asia, the Middle East, the West Indies, and Africa. Most Native Americans, if living in Britain today, would be regarded as being black. You hear that? Most Native Americans. So therefore, American Indians were taken to Britain. Okay? Y'all gotta be, you know what, rock with me here now. Okay? Now, most Native Americans, if living in Britain today, would be regarded as black, especially if their ancestry were not known. Pardon me. Negro was also, let me drink some water. Give me a second here. Negro was also used in a general way in the North American colonies. Some examples illustrate the use of Negro and black as applied to people of American ancestry. Okay? So there is such a thing as American ancestry, and no, it is not the natives. Okay? Thank you. Now, an example of the West Indies is especially illuminating. In 1764, William Young was sent to St. Vincent as part of the British occupation of the island. Living on St. Vincent was about 300 black Sharibs as free Negroes, about 100 red Sharibs or Indians, and some 4,000 French and their slaves, according to Young. The British found it difficult to control the Caribs, and wars fought with them in 1771, 1772, and again during 1795 to 1796. All right? During the latter crisis, Young wrote an extremely anti-Carib tract designed to prove that the Caribs should be removed from St. Vincent. They were eventually defeated, and some 5,000 were shipped to an island near the coast of Honduras. Young was anxious to prove the so-called black Caribs were not true Aborigines, but were in fact Negro colonists. Okay, free Negroes or Negro usurpers. This was important to him because he wanted to show they had no bona fide land rights or Aboriginal titles. For our purpose, the interesting point admitted by Young is that the so-called blacks or Negroes were occasionally of tawny and mixed complexion because of the American ancestry, and that their customs, personal names, and language were those of the native Caribs. Okay, still further, Young admitted that they had repeatedly intermarried with American women. He consistently refers to them as Negroes nonetheless. All right. Even if they are saying that they all spoke the Carib language, including the women, but they were trying to separate them. All right. Isn't that what they did in the 70s when they took the father out of the home? Again, there is nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. Young also relayed a great deal of heresy information about how the black Caribs have originated, which is without foundation for analysis here. The important point is this: that the people thoroughly American in identity, culture, and language were called black, and Negro solely because of being mixed with African ancestry. This tendency continues incidentally among white scholars who even today refuse to accept Caribs' avowed feelings of Indianness and continue to call them black. In 1619, some 20 Negroes were brought to Virginia At least 11 have names of Spanish or probably Spanish character. Later, they were joined by Negroes and mulattoes with names such as Antonio Severo and John Pedro. These Spanish-derived servants, you hear that, servants, okay, could well have been of part American ancestry. However, no evidence is available except that they were largely secured from captured Spanish vessels. All right. So when they're talking about, oh, well, in 1619, the first slaves come from Africa, there's no foundation to prove that to be true. Okay. Now, in 1676, one Goen, an Indian servant, acquired his freedom in Virginia. 2 decades earlier, Mihil Goen, called a Negro, also acquired his freedom. It would appear that the Negro was probably father to Indian in this case. In 1670, the population of Virginia colony was said to be 40,000, including 2,000 black slaves. Okay. If evidence indicates that there could not have been that many Africans there, and also that there were a great many American slaves or servants. So once again, it is estimated that the colony of Virginia, okay, the colony of Virginia, remember, the colony of Virginia is not the state of Virginia. The state of Virginia is now an expansion of the colony of Virginia, okay? But at that time, it is estimated that they had about 40,000, okay, residents living there on that plantation with about 2,000 so-called black slaves. But the evidence indicates that there could not have been that many Africans. So that means that those so-called black people, where did they come from? Where did they come from? You see what I'm saying? Family, you got to read between the lines, family. All right? Thus, the total of blacks must have been included a good many, what? Americans. Okay? Now, in 1698, 3 fugitive Negroes were reported in North Carolina, of whom was an American. Similarly, a list of Negroes imported into Virginia 1710 to 1718 by sea includes at least 69 Indians, mostly from what? The Carolinas. Okay, so they were taking over people from one place to one next and telling them they're all Africans. Come on, man. Okay, likewise, list of Negroes brought into New York from 1715 to 1736 include many slaves, probably or stated American ancestry from what? Camden, Jamaica, Honduras, Carolinas, and Virginia. So they were taking American Indians from the Americas, bringing them into the mainland and telling them they're from Africa. Come on, man. Man, family. You know, I'm just here to drop the knowledge on y'all, man. Okay? That's what I'm here to do. In the 1715 to 1717, a period, the vestry book of King William's Parish, Virginia records 1 year robbing an Indian and 2 years later robbing the Negro. Okay? In similar manner, a 1691 list of Negro slaves in York County, Virginia includes Kid Indian, while a 1728 list of Negroes at the home house of Virginia planter includes Indian robbing. So they were changing things around. Robbing, incidentally, is a common name for slaves of what? American ancestry. All right? In 17, so once again, Robin is not an English name. You see, we have to be mindful when we start talking about, oh, well, our names is the white man, so-called white man name. Be careful when y'all say that. All right? Now, in 1748, there was an advertisement in New York for a Negro manservant called Robin, almost of the complexion of an Indian, talks good English, can read and write, and plays on the fiddle. Okay? In 1723, what does that word sound, fiddle? Does that sound familiar in a movie? The fiddle? In 1723, Virginia adopted a law depriving free Negro, mulattoes, and Indians from certain basic civil rights. The act was what? Disallowed by the British officials in 1735. Lieutenant Governor Gosh defended it by asserting that he wanted to make a perpetual brand upon free Negroes and mulattoes by excluding them from the great privilege of a free man. He wanted to make the free Negroes sensible that a distinction ought to be made between their offspring and the descendants of an Englishman, with whom they never were be acquainted equal, since the act applied to Native Americans and half Americans, mulattoes, okay, an African and an American Indian we can also consider the mulatto as well. Gutch language would seem to include them under the general category of free Negroes and mulattoes. A welcome classification of terminology was provided in 1719 by the government of South Carolina when it's decided, and for preventing all doubts and scruples that may arise that ought to be taxed on musties, mulattoes, etc. All such slaves as are not entirely Indian shall be what? Accounted as Negro. The significance of this act is that all later enumerations of Negro and Indian slaves in South Carolina have to be analyzed with the thought in mind that many Negroes were probably one half or other fractions of what? American ancestry. So when I tell y'all, okay, it is safe to assume that literally all the Negroes within the United States, they have our blood in them. If they are not American Indian and some of their ancestors came from Africa, guess what? They could still call themselves American Indian because they mixed with us. And back then they would have been considered a mulatto. All right? Now, New Jersey was also an area where Americans and Africans intermixed with the considerable frequency. All right? In 1734, an advertisement appeared for the recovery of Juan. He is half Indian and half Negro. Okay? He plays the fiddle and speaks good English and his country Indian. All right? Juan was not specifically called a Negro, but a 1747 advertisement reads, "Runaway on the 20th of September last from Cohanacy, a very lusty Negro fellow named Samson, aged about 53 years and had some Indian blood in him. He had with him a boy about 12 or 13 years of age named Sam, was born of Indian woman and looks like an Indian, only his hair. They both talk Indian very well, and it's likely that they have dressed themselves in Indian dress, gone to Carolina." Okay? Now they fooled y'all, okay, and gave y'all a concept of what Indian hair looks like. Let me tell y'all something. Every time I go to a beautician to get my hair done, the first thing that come out of their mouth, they say what? You have Indian hair. It never fails. What is Indian hair? They know. You see what I'm saying? So family, man, we gotta, I'm telling you, man, y'all gotta put this in perspective. But that's what we're here to do today. Okay? Similarly, in 1778, advertisement we read, okay? We read, was stolen from his mother, a Negro girl, was stolen from her mother, a Negro girl about 9 or 10 years of age, named Diana. Her mother's name is Cash, was married to an Indian named Louise Willis, which is, I guess, another way of saying Willis, near 6 feet high, about 35 years of age. They have a male child with them between 3 and 4 years of age. Any person who takes up the said Negroes and Indian shall have the above reward. From these examples, we can see that people of mixed American, okay, African ancestry could be called Negroes in New Jersey. All right, Cyrus Bastille, a Philadelphia baker, black, born in 1732 at Burlington, New Jersey, married a Delaware Indian woman. Okay, now when you start hearing Indian, now start imagining the people that look like us and not these natives. Okay, these natives, and we're not Indians because of them. They are Indians because of us. All right, let me set the record straight on this. And I want any one of them to come try to prove to me otherwise in a court of law. I promise you they will not win. Okay? Yes, family. I'm gonna drink some more water. I appreciate that. All right. Now, His son became a Quaker and an anti-slavery leader and was known as a Negro. In Canada, in 1747, 4 Negroes and a Penis, American slave, escaped from Montreal. A French writer referred to them simply as Negroes. In 1759, one Saunders, a runaway slave, was described in South Carolina as a Negro man of the musty breed. Musty meant either European American or European American African. You see, they had different terms for different mixes, right? In 1775, authorities in South Carolina were ordered to apprehend John Swan, a reported free Negro or mestizo man. Now, for those of you who don't know what a mestizo is, I know what it means, but I'm going to pull it up for you so that you'll know exactly what a mestizo is. And I have it right here. Let me share this. Let me stop sharing this and go ahead here and show you this. A mestizo, what does it mean? Or who is a mestizo? All right. Who is a mestizo? Here we go. Okay. A mestizo in Latin America, a man of mixed race, especially one having Spanish and indigenous descent. That's a mestizo. All right. Especially having what? Spanish or indigenous descent. So a mestizo could be somebody who look just like us because they are of that Spanish descent. All right. And mixed with one of our indigenous, whether it's man or woman. All right. So I have to put those terms in context based on the time. All right. Let me stop sharing my screen and let's proceed. Okay. Let me share this. All right. Let's share this. Boom. All right. Good. All right. Let me turn the light on. Give me a second, guys. All right, family, we going in. We going in. All right. I know this is a little long. But we going in. All right. I hope you guys are here with me. Okay. We going in. Okay. Now we in school right now. Let's get to the bottom of the story and not his story. Let's talk about our story. Okay. Now, in the 1780s, okay, certain white Virginians became to agitate for the termination of the Jingaskin Indian Reservation in Northampton County. The reserve was described as asylum for free Negroes, and it was alleged that the Americans had become nearly extinct, there being at this time not more than 3 or 4 genuine Indian at most. The place is a harbor and convenient asylum for an idle set of free Negroes. In 1812, it was argued that the place is now inhabited by as many black men as Indians. The Indian women have many of them married black men, and a majority probably of the inhabitants are blacks or have black blood in them. The real Indians are few. All right, that's what they were insinuating, right? The reserve was divided, allotted in 1813, and by 1832, whites had acquired most of it. In 1828, the Jingaskin descendants were described as respectable Negro land owners. Okay, this episode remains one of the Young's attack upon the Caribs of St. Vincent in 1795, and also of more recent attempts to allot and acquire Indian lands. You see, so what they did, they take away our Indianness, so to speak, and call us whatever, so that that's what they did with the Caribs. You see what I'm saying? So when you read, you'll see how all this transpired. Okay, a similar attack took place upon the Pumanque, Matapunin in 1843, which failed. Okay, and against the Natoway from 1830 to 1878, which succeeded. By the 1840s, at least 2 Natoways were registered as free Negroes. The heirs of the one family were described in 1878 as all being Negroes and very poor. Now, family, I want you to look at these dates. All in the 1700s, 1800s, we were still the Indians. These natives just came about on the scene in the late 1800s, early 1900s. You see what I'm saying? So, when I'm telling you, they cannot come to me with their BS, man. All right? They cannot come to me with this. Okay? Now, aside from Virginia, there were persons descended from female Americans imported after a certain date could obtain their freedom. All slaves of American ancestry remained slaves throughout the entire duration of slavery unless they were emancipated or ran away. At the end of the 18th century, Bob, a carpenter fellow of a yellowish complexion, Mustee, has bushy hair, ran away. He was said to speak more proper than Negroes in general. Other persons of American ancestry who were free also were called black or Negro. Paul Coffey, all right, the noted half American, half African merchant, was called at various times an Indian, okay, a black man, and he is free and enlightened African. He signed petitions with Indian men and all free Negroes and mulattoes. Other examples of similar nature abound. One author writes that the Sampsons and Galleys, property owners and school teachers, though predominantly of Indian blood, were leaders among the free Negro of Petersburg, Virginia in 1816. Virginia tax rolls and census records from the 1780s to 1850 have numerous examples of people of Indian tribal identity being classified as what? Free people of color, as mulattoes. In fact, the practice was almost universal. Some were also classified as FN, which is free Negro, or as B, which is black, in various records. In certain countries such as Southampton, okay, in 1830, and in parts of Delaware, remember their counties, pardon me, virtually all free non-whites were categorized as free Negroes. Also enumerated under the free people of color column, these lists included people of Nantucket and other tribal groups. Under certain conditions, persons of African descent could be legally classified as members of what? An Indian tribe or as Indians. You hear that again? Under certain conditions, because they were mixed, they came in and mixed in with us. Okay? Now, in a treaty with the Creek Nation, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs noted in 1832, as Indian, whether a fool or half-blood, who has a female slave living with him as his wife, is the head of a family and entitled to a reservation of land. Also, free blacks who have been admitted as members of the Creek Nation and are regarded as such by the tribe, if they have families, are entitled to reservation of land. In the 1860s, all persons of African ancestry who had been slaves were granted by treaty citizenship in the 5 civilized tribes. Okay? Because if they're from Africa, we say, you know what? I don't know if it was a reconciliation. We know what we did to y'all. Okay? So they granted them citizenship in the 5 civilized tribes. Now, keep in mind, at that time, the 5 civilized tribes were already being infiltrated by what we call now the natives. Okay, and it couldn't have happened without some people selling out. Okay, so this could get a little bit complicated, but we're going to keep it simple for the purpose of this information. Okay, now, of Indian territory, the general trend, however, was to enroll the more visible part of African persons as freedmen, citizens, and to restrict their tribal status. When lands were allotted in the 1880s, to the early 1900s, most such persons were not allowed to assert American ancestry and were therefore denied future rights as Indians. Hence, Here comes the Indian Bureau of Affairs. You see, we are putting all this in perspective. Okay? Now, during the Seminole Wars, a new term seems to have been coined, that of Indian Negroes. One source, General Wiley Thompson, asserted in 1835 that they are descended from the Seminoles and are connected by consanguinity, all right, sanguinity. Other writers referred to them as hostile Negroes and mulattoes in the Seminole Nation, or simply Indian Negroes. Few white writers seem to have continued the use of Indian Negro. However, in the Iku or Iki or Yuki or Yuchi, I think it's Yuchi, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. However, in the Yuchi language, mixed people of that type were referred to as Gushpi Tla, whatever that is. It says red black people. Okay. Now, in north of Carolina, many people of Lumbee Indian identity were categorized as times as Negroes. Okay. In 1837, Charles Osindin of Robeson County was punished as free Negro in 1842. One of the Brave Boy family was called a Negro, while in 1857, a Chavez was charged as a free person of color with carrying a shotgun. He was not convicted because the act specified free Negroes, and he was charged as a free colored. All right. The court stated that free persons of color may be persons colored by Indian blood. The indictment cannot be sustained. So again, wordplay. All right. In a similar situation, some white men took away guns from the Pamunkey people in Virginia in 1857. The governor had them returned, but stated, if any become 1/4 mixed with the Negro race, then they may be treated as free Negroes or mulattoes. Virginia at this time defined a mulatto as 1/4 or more African. Okay? So you see, a mulatto was a mix at that time, a mixed breed of American Indian and African. Okay? In Louisiana, 1856, the Black Code was said to refer to offenses involving slaves, Indians, and free persons of color. Many narratives of ex-slaves recorded in 1830s revealed Indian ancestry. One such person called an Indian was Uncle Mobile Hobson of Virginia. He says, "Et come time na marry," and that sounds like Jamaican language, if you ask me. And he married a black woman. That make me black. That make me black. I suppose. In 1871, a right writer of Maryland observed, okay, in Dorchester County of Indian Creek, some of the last Indians of the peninsula struck their wigwams towards the close of the last century, and there are now no full-blooded Aborigines on the eastern shore, although many of free-born Negroes show Indian traces. All right. Quite commonly, however, some of the freeborn Negroes of the eastern shores continue to identify and survive as native people. Okay, the whites often try to deny their Indianness, as in 1856 when a maker was erected to commemorate a woman who had testified that Nantucket, people of Delaware, had African ancestry. The Indians were referred to on the marker as arrogant Negroes that assume to be what they are not. Isn't that what these natives are telling us? Isn't that what that same native was trying to tell us in the video? Family, they know our history and they know who we are. You see what I'm saying? Pay attention to the language. Go listen to that call that I had with that gentleman from the Cherokee Nation. Okay? Telling us, oh, well, you're trying to be what you are not. It's the same language because they know. That is the goal, to keep us from identifying as who we are. Now, during the 18th century, most persons of mixed race, especially if free, were classified as mulattoes, musties, or persons of color. The term Negro was perhaps less likely to be used for such people, except as noted in the examples above. This usage continued in some states, such as Carolinas and Virginia, well into the 19th century. Okay. For example, the jurist of South Carolina noted in 1852, it is not according to the use of the language in the region to speak of one altogether black as a person of color. The phrase is almost exclusively applied to one of mixed blood and color. Okay? A change took place in such states as Indiana in 1817, Kentucky in 1852, and elsewhere in 1850s, early 1900, as the term Negro came to encompass most persons of part African descent. This change may not have affected people of solely African and American descent, especially if the African ancestry predominated, since many, but not all, Native Americans were brown or dark-colored without African ancestry. Their descendants, when mixed only with African blood, would very likely be seen as Negroes by most Europeans, especially in North America, where special terms for such persons such as Zambo, Grifo, Lobo, Cafuzo, Cabra, and Cabor never became current. The United States Census also tended to expand the use of the term Black or Negro. In 1890, Black was to be used for all persons having 3/4 or more Black blood. In 1910, Black was supposed to be applied only to full-blooded Negroes, while matter of who was an Indian was left to enumerator. The term mulatto was to be used for all other persons having some proportion or perceptible trace of Negro blood. It is certain that large numbers of Americans or part Americans were classified as Negroes or mulatto under these rules. For example, of Mattaponi only, one person was counted as Indian by the census out of reservation population of at least 40 persons. Similarly, the Pose Patuk of Long Island had, I think it's the Puspatuk, pardon me, the Puspatuk of Long Island had only one person counted as Indian, doubtless because the rest were enumerated as Negroes or mulattoes. That's when they started bringing these natives to start taking our place, because there had to be a void to be filled. You see what I'm saying? Now, all that was being played out in movies as early with cowboy and Indians, so that by the time all this come into play, it was already established in our minds that we were not the Indians. You see what I'm saying? Mind games. All right. Now, the 1910 census counted 2,255 Negroes who were part Indian and were enrolled members of the tribes. Another group of 1,793 tribal members were of mixed European, African, and American ancestry. Thus, only slightly more than 3,000 persons who were part African were counted with the Indian population, as compared with the hundreds of thousands who were doubtless counted as Negro or mulatto because of living away from federally recognized reservation areas. You see what I'm saying? So they took our people, put them in the hood, and called them Black and African American, not realizing that were reservations as well. But I've already spoken on that. In 1930, a person of mixed Indian and Negro blood shall be returned as a Negro unless the Indian blood predominates and status as an Indian generally accepted in the community. Okay? By 1940, all American hybrids were to be counted as Negroes, unless the Indian ancestry very definitively predominates and he is universally accepted as an Indian. Okay? So in other words, they determine what an Indian is. Okay? I mean, essentially, that's what they're saying. Okay? Now, even pure blood Indians could be counted as Blacks, as in Nevada in 1880, when the census enumerator categorized 90 members of the Darkwater Shoshone tribe in that matter. Now, think about it, right? Even pure blood Indians could be counted as blacks. So what these natives talking about, what they are telling you who a pure blood Indian is, could be counted as black. Come on, family. I mean, come on, man. Man, I'm just letting y'all know, man. Wow. Ooh. Family, can you see what was done to us, man? Can you see what was done to us? Man. Woo. I'm going to read that again. Even pure blood Indians could be counted as what? Blacks. Pure bloods. As in Nevada in 1880, when the census enumerator categorized 90 members of the Darkwater Shoshone tribe in that manner. In the state of Delaware, more recent decades found that if a person said he was an Indian, he was recorded as either black or white, depending upon his appearance. Come on, man. Y'all think this is a game? In 1980, census was also arranged that any American African mixed blood who checked both black and Indian box was counted solely as black, because they just don't want us to be who we are, period. Okay? In summary, it seems clear that many persons of Native American ancestry, in whole or part, have been at times classified as Negroes or blacks. Go ask these natives that's over here taking our place. Ask them if they were ever classified as that, and that would just put an end to everything. This is a matter of considerable significance for scholars seeking to understand the actual ethnic or racial identity of non-white persons in North American, British colonies, and in the United States over the centuries. All right. Earlier studies have shown the significance of the terms mulatto, musti, sambo, zambo, and colored as indicating persons of American or possibly part American ancestry. Collectively, these studies serve to show the probability of much greater degree of intermixture between Africans and what? Us, Americans, Native Americans, the real ones, than has hereunto been widely acknowledged. Remember when they used to show pictures in cartoons of Sambo, making you think Sambo was an African? All right then. But of course, it might be argued that this is old hat, especially to people in the Afro-American community who have long been aware of extensive Indian ancestry and who have, at least since the Civil War, self-consciously utilized the term Negro or black, and of course colored, to encompass people of mixed Native African and African descent, individuals such as Ann Plato, Paul Coffey, Crispus Attucks, Hiram Reveals, and many others have long been referred to as Negroes, in spite of having perhaps at least as much Native American as African ancestry, and even when living in Indian communities, as was the case with Attucks and Coffey. Okay? From the scholarly perspective, the logic of white racism, which has tended to classify people in very arbitrary ways, is neither the logic of genetics nor of bona fide ethnicity. You see what I'm saying? The mixture of African and American does not make a person black or Negro any more than it makes one automatically Indian. Ethnic scholars must aver that it is both pernicious and dangerous to read into the evidence and to affirm for earlier times the pronouncements of dominant social caste, their myths, their prejudice, and their systems of classification and what is that? Nomenclature, and must be subjected to critical and empirical revelation. And then, of course, we have notes here. All right, guys. So let me just take a break real quick and drink some water, and I will conclude with a few more things that I want to show you guys here. For instance, now, for those of you who don't know about Walter Plecker, I'm going to show you guys some information on, okay, np.gov, okay, np.gov. Let me go ahead and share that with you guys here. Give me a second here. Boom. Do, 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 do. Right here. Okay. Now, we're almost done, guys. We're almost done. I hope you guys are not tired. I hope y'all ain't tired. All right. What I just highlighted in black. Okay. In 1924, the Racial Integrity Act was passed. It said, among other things, that it was illegal for whites and non-whites to marry, as well as recognize only two racial classifications, against solidifying everything we just went through, white and colored. Walter Ashby Plecker was a strong advocate for it, as he wanted to keep the white master race pure, all right? And because he denied the existence of the Virginia Indians, he called mongrels. He believed the Virginia Indians wanted to escape Negro status so they could go to white schools and marry whites. So again, who they're telling you the Indian is in Virginia? The Negroes. After this act was passed, it was easier for Plecker to get his wish in having documents use only the term white or colored. To escape Plecker's aggressive campaign, many Virginia Indians left the state. This is the same year the Indian Citizen Act of 1924 was passed, and the act granted all American Indians in the United States citizenships. Okay, some had gained previously through marriage, okay, meaning that marrying pale people, okay, special treaties. Some of them married and gave away land to become United States citizens, receipt of allotments, or through military granted service. So family, y'all gotta know what happened and how you're able to put things in perspective. Now I'm gonna share one more thing for you to put a nail on the coffin, or a nail in the coffin. All right, and trust me, I got a whole lot more ammunitions for anybody who want to deny anything that I'm showing y'all right now. Okay, now, this is the History Channel. Now, the reason why I didn't go to the History Channel first, okay, is because, all right, the reason why I didn't go to the History Channel first is because I don't want people to say, oh, well, this is not a good source of information. I had to go into all the documents and take my time with that, all right, to now come to this, okay? Now, this is the History Channel. When Native Americans were slaughtered in the name of civilization. I'm going to read that again. When Native Americans were slaughtered in the name of civilization. Let's read. Their skin was, I don't know if y'all seen that, but can anybody tell me and type what was the complexion of their skin? And that's just going to solidify everything else. I'm just putting a nail in the coffin right now. Can anybody type and tell me what was the color of their skin? I hope y'all with me. I hope y'all with me now. Man, my family is slow on this tonight. Okay, I guess I'm gonna have to read it out. I think y'all fell asleep on me, man. Y'all fell asleep on me. But it's all right, thank you. I appreciate that. Dark. Okay. Their skin was dark. Their language were foreign. Okay. All right. And their worldviews and spiritual beliefs were beyond most white men's comprehension. In other words, our system of spirituality, they just couldn't comprehend it. Okay? Now, on a cool May day in 1758, a 10-year-old girl with red hair and freckles was caring for her neighbor's children in rural Western Pennsylvania. A few moments, Mary Campbell's life changed forever when Delaware Indians kidnapped her and absorbed her into their community for the next 6 years. She became the first of some 200 known cases of white captives, okay, many of whom became pawns in an ongoing power struggle that included European powers, American colonists, and indigenous peoples straining into mainstream their population, their land, and their way. See, no, they're not going to tell you about none of that. All right. While Mary was ultimately returned to her white family, and some evidence points to her having lived happily with her adopted Indian tribe, stories such as hers became a cautionary tale among white settlers, stoking fear of what? Savage Indians, and creating a paranoia that escalated into all-out Indian hating. Now, look at the complexion of the Indians. Look at them. Who they look like. What's the complexion here? Okay? So when these natives talking, man, they got to show some respect. All right? Look at the complexions here. Hmm? So, man, listen, I'm done. I put all that in there for y'all so y'all could go ahead and read and do what y'all got to do with the information. But I gave it to you. All right? I gave it to you. All that stuff is in there. All right, guys. So once again, I want to thank you guys for being a part of this build. I know it was a bit long, it's over 2 hours, but it was necessary to go into all that because even more so, more than ever, okay, we have to start putting things in perspective. All right. So I gave you guys enough information. I have put the documents in there. And again, I have an arsenal of more information. All right. Again, solidifying everything that I'm talking about. All right. Just so that y'all know. Okay. So I hope you guys found some value in the information. Okay. And once again, I don't need no donations from you. I don't need anything from you. The only thing I need from you is to spread the knowledge, share the information, and it's time for us to step up. Okay? It's time for us to step up. And that's the reason why you cannot get reparations because you don't know who you are. Okay? That's the problem. All right? That's the problem. Okay? Some Africans already got reparations. In fact, African kings and queens and leaders in Africa, they got reparations for slaves already. Why do you think so-called black people in the United States cannot get it? Because they are not black. You see what I'm saying? We have to be in our proper status. And I'm talking about geographically, that is. We have to be in our proper status to bring a legitimate claim so that we're able to get redress. All right. So like I told y'all before, I'm working on some things and we're about to put some things in perspective. That's why I'm back with that information because it's time to step up and make some things happen. All right, guys. So you guys are absolutely welcome. It's always a pleasure dropping that information. Do me a favor, please just continue to share the information. All right. Share, 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 share. Okay. A lot of people that don't know, share the information with them. All right. If they're confused, it's okay if you cannot pinpoint your exact plan. Just know that what happened, you are still us. You feel what I'm saying? That's all you need to know. Period. All right. So y'all enjoy the rest of your continuation, and we will be talking soon. Have a good one.